Hello, welcome to La Excellence. I am Harsha Mannava, anthropology teacher at La Excellence. We are discussing this book, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. And in the previous videos, we started with agriculture, and we are at the point of time where we are trying to understand what have been the changes ushered in by this so-called revolution that we labeled as agriculture. Agriculture, we said, transformed human life, and we began with calling it history's biggest fraud, and we discussed how, ironically, people thought agriculture would improve their lives, but we said they had miscalculated, and agriculture did not improve quality of human life. It only led to massive increase in population. And next we said it is not just the economic change, but along with agriculture, came a lot of activity like trade, development of large economy, stronger or more centralized political system, big governments. Now all such activities needed massive human cooperation, and we said that cooperation on a large scale could not be sustained by earlier modes of cooperation like gossip. So large scale myths, religious myths, common belief system were forged like nationalism, government, money. Many imagined entities, many imagined ideas were created, and many people started believing in them. This common belief system served as the foundation on which people began cooperation on a large scale, and it is that cooperation which made humans different than any other comparable animal in the kingdom, in the animal kingdom. Today we'll move to the other important aspect. So agriculture gave rise to complex civilization, and this complex civilization is largely an imagined order that consists of many stories, many myths. So on the imagined order, that is the civilization we created, is an imagined order because we don't see it. Now this imagined order, imagined concept called civilization, broadly can be understood in terms of two realms. One, the realm of ideas, the other is the realm of society. We discussed the realm of ideas in the previous video. Now we'll discuss the realm of society. How was society structured? What are the consequences to society thanks to agriculture? Earlier, when people were hunter-gatherers, it was largely an egalitarian society. What do we mean by egalitarian society? A society not in which there is no inequality. Even in a hunter-gatherer society, there are inequalities in the sense that there will be one person who is a better hunter than the other person, other people. He may be given a lot of admiration. That is inequality. That exists even in hunter-gatherers. But hunter-gatherers do not have rigid stratification, that is, people are not divided into tough layers, this layer, below this layer, and this layer. For example, in a hunter-gatherer society, the most skilled hunter's son need not be the most skilled hunter. In the previous generation, one man could be skilled. In the next generation, somebody else's son can become the skilled hunter. So in that sense, privileges or achievements do not get passed down the generation. So there is no stratification. But with agriculture, elaborate hierarchy developed, and complex systems of dividing people started emerging. So a characteristic feature of agricultural society was hierarchy. And hierarchy also was a basis of organizing mass cooperation. So starting with agriculture, we see that across the world, it's not just in one part of the world. Independently, across the world, we see that people are divided into layers, into upper class, lower class, landlords, slaves, whites, blacks, you name it. In India, caste system, upper castes, lower castes. And along matching with this system of division, also were a system of privileges. Those at the top received lot of privileges. Those at the bottom received none. They in fact suffered from many disabilities. And it's not that a society should not have privileges. In our society, there are privileges. In an office, the CEO gets a bigger room. In the government, the chief minister gets a personal plane, maybe a helicopter. But those privileges are achieved. But in a hierarchy, in a social hierarchy, in a stratification, in a stratified society, privileges are bestowed without any regard for achievement. Now that creates oppressive society. So starting with agriculture, this hierarchy in society caused enormous oppression. But first, let us understand why did people want to create hierarchy? Why were they not happy with, egalitarianism? Or in other words, does hierarchy have any benefits? Did it have any positive outcomes, or were there any functions? Of course, we'll discuss the dysfunctions of hierarchy, but first, were there any functional aspects to hierarchy? There were some. First, we said that this whole society was run on an imagined order with many imagined ideas. So, imagined hierarchies and unjust discrimination was a tool to regulate relations between millions of humans. So, now this large scale cooperation started taking off. So, having clear hierarchy, today we also have hierarchy, right? Somebody, let's say a secretary comes from Delhi on a field visit to some village in Nalgonda, Pochampalli village for example. The local BDO comes. So the hierarchy is clear, secretary higher, the BDO is a lower level officer. So he comes and assists this person who has come from Delhi and who himself might be somebody of northeast ethnicity. So you see this large scale of anonymous cooperation. Why is that facilitated? Because the hierarchy is clear. So this clear hierarchy allows, in a way, people to cooperate on a large scale. So this probably was why these imagined hierarchies were set up. So the other benefit is, like I said, the basis of what we just discussed is that hierarchy enables strangers to cooperate on a large scale, because this hierarchy clearly also delineates or gives the prescribed notion of behavior patterns. Somebody is top in the hierarchy and somebody is below in the hierarchy. So when you see a stranger, based on his position in the hierarchy, you know how you must behave towards him, you know how you must treat him. So this hierarchy gives some kind of preset set of behaviors that made people's lives easier, in terms that when they had to go about trading in anonymous regions or go on this large scale diplomatic missions or wars, the hierarchy enabled strangers to cooperate. It gave them a prescribed set of behavior patterns. Somebody is superior, I respect him, yes sir. If somebody is below me, I know that I am the commander, so I can boss him. So this is how hierarchy set a clear behavioral patterns between people. But is hierarchy good? Of course not. There are many dysfunctions to hierarchy. For example, it is not fair to begin with. Hierarchy itself is not bad, but hierarchy based on some accumulated privileges is bad. So just because somebody's birth, hierarchy based on birth is bad, but hierarchy based on achievement is good. So in hierarchy, traditional societies, starting with agriculture, in the beginning the hierarchy was largely based on birth, it was not based on achievement. When hierarchy is based on birth, it is unfair because it limits the opportunities to grow for those who are talented. It leads to unjust economic and political systems where those who are really skilled and those who are really talented do not get their fair share. And it creates many unofficial glass ceilings. Like we have the famous story of Karna in Mahabharata, remember? So Karna in Mahabharata is constantly trying to fight off this oppressive caste system. He thinks he is extremely talented, in fact the most talented person, and maybe more talented than Arjuna himself. But just because he is given his social status is that of a low caste, he is not given his due share of respect. So Karna is the most tragic character in the entire epic. That is because his status versus his talent, there is no match. If you have to rate him according to his talent, he is supposed to be top class. But throughout this epic, you see that he's been insulted, humiliated based on his birth. So that is how hierarchy created very oppressive systems. But before that, how does hierarchy, so we saw how hierarchy is functional and dysfunctional, but how does hierarchy operate? Why do people not, if hierarchy is unjust, why do people just not rebel against it? That is because social hierarchy is enforced through a very, very complex set of rules. Like it is enforced through the political system, it is enforced through religion, it is enforced in the name of God, it is enforced in the name of social order. So people do not realize that the unfairness or the injustice in their life is because they don't realize the injustice because the injustice is being explained, rationalized through various conceived myths, various stories. Just take that myth we have in Rig Veda on caste system. Caste system is bad. But why did the lower caste not rebel against it? Because they were told your lower caste status is because of karma. In the previous birth you had sinned and the consequences of your sins is your lower status in this birth. So in that sense, religion, political system, take Hammurabi's code. Hammurabi's code is a political code, it's a set of rules. But that code clearly distinguished between a set of superiors. It divided society into three classes: superiors, the middle class, and then slaves. Slaves had no rights. Even if a slave is talented, he could not have control over his life. He was somebody's property. So like that, a king used his power to create laws, and laws themselves had hierarchy ingrained in them. Why go to Hammurabi's code? Even the American Declaration of Independence, which is a great document, also had hierarchy, but this hierarchy was based not on any ethnicity, but it was based on man, woman. A woman did not have rights. She was still treated as a man's property. Blacks did not have rights. They were treated as the property of the whites. So in that sense, hierarchy was rationalized, explained and justified through religion, political system, laws, codes and morality. Even morality was used to justify hierarchy. So if somebody was trying to fight the hierarchy, he would be made feel guilty that you are being immoral, you are going against God's sanctioned order. So hierarchy was thus legitimized, and that's how for centuries people lived under oppressive systems without complaining. Occasionally we had rebels like Jesus, Buddha, who rebelled against the system and created an alternate morality. But that was very rare. For the large part of our lives, society was oppressive, and this oppression was facilitated through an elaborate mechanism of religion and politics. Next, how does hierarchy develop and perpetuate itself? Here Harari gives us an interesting theory. He says the beginning of any hierarchy, so how does hierarchy begin at all? It's unfair, all right, but how does it begin at all? Any hierarchy begins with some accidental circumstances. Some accidental circumstances give rise to some privileges to some and some disabilities to others. But starting with what is an accidental event, people now start developing vested interests on this based on this accidental demarcation, and over a period of time these vested interests get deep rooted, and these vested interests, once deep rooted, use all their power and resources to stop any change, and they resist change and they try to continue and perpetuate the hierarchy. Let's see an example to understand what this is. We'll begin with the example of racism in US. It's a very hot topic. It's a constant tumor in the US society. Recently we saw this protests against the death. The US erupted in protests against the death of a man called George Floyd, and that led to a movement called the Black Lives Matter. And across US and even in many European countries and cities like Paris, Amsterdam, protests erupted, where the blacks and many whites also came in solidarity to fight for justice against racism. So how did this racism in US come about? It all came about with a chance historical event. That is, some white people who found it difficult to make a living in Europe said, fine, we can't live here, we do not have economic opportunities, let's cross the ocean, go to the newly discovered land and try our luck there. So these people came here, settled, and they discovered this huge continent with enormous land. And now they had huge land and farms at their disposal. They needed labor. And almost all the whites had access to land, and they were reluctant to do the labor because the land was so much. Then that gave rise to slave trade. That is, so they realized this land of Africa is slightly poor. So ships would go in and some people would just go capture some blacks in Africa along the West African coast, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Sierra Leone, Liberia. Along that coast they would go. This is shown in a movie made by Steven Spielberg. I forgot the Amistad, yes, Amistad. It's the name of the movie that Steven Spielberg made, and it's a brilliant movie on this slave trade. So in that slave trade they used to capture these blacks and bring them forcefully to America, and they would have slave markets where the blacks would be sold to whites, and then they were made to work on fields. So a chance factor, some whites crossed the ocean, got land, and the blacks who were living in Africa used to be captured by these people who had more weapons and who came from higher culture. They used to use their power to capture by force, kidnap the blacks in Africa and take them to US. That's a chance event. But now, because these blacks joined the US society at a lower level as slaves, the whites were landlords. Over the next centuries, even until today, the US society is based on this historical fact that some people came as slaves, whereas some other migrants came slightly before them, but then they captured land first. Both are migrants, both whites and blacks are migrants to US, because the natives are American Indians, the tribes, but they are not, they are out of the picture. The whites and blacks, both who are migrants, have now been divided into elite and non-elite. The elite are whites, the non-elite are blacks in general. Now how was this hierarchy enforced? First, slavery was made legal. The blacks were considered as a property. For until Abraham Lincoln fought the famous American Civil War, blacks were largely considered as a property, as slaves without any liberty, and as property, just like a cattle, just like a house, a car. A white man would say, these are my slaves, my property. But after the American Civil War, slavery was abolished. But even then, the blacks could not have right to vote, they did not have right to public office, right to employment, they did not have basic rights. So they and segregation was very common. They were made to live in separate quarters, they could not access public facilities like schools and water tanks. So many segregation and discrimination was there in US, and this was all legal. The laws had provisions in them which favored, which facilitated discrimination of blacks. So laws gave voting rights only to whites, laws segregated blacks and whites, laws made sure blacks lived in separate quarters. So that's how racist legislations gave rise to social practices which separated both the races, like there were white schools, there were white blacks. Even in restaurants, they had to sit separately. So this is how it happened. There was a chance historical event, so that gave whites control over blacks, and that led to discriminatory laws. They famously called the Jim Crow laws, the discriminatory laws, and this discriminatory laws even further exacerbated poverty and lack of education among blacks, and this gave rise to many cultural prejudices, like the blacks are criminal, they are uncouth, not pleasant people, and these prejudices further fed into discriminatory laws and gave rise to and even led to more poverty and lack of education. That is how a vicious circle was generated based on a chance historical event. Isn't it? Very tragic. But doesn't all this sound familiar? Yes, it sounds familiar to many Indians. How? Caste system. We have the same story in caste system. But just that the story goes back to about 2500 years ago, whereas this story in the US is only a few hundred years ago. The story of caste system can be traced to some few thousand years ago. So around after the IVC, around 1500 BC, some fair-skinned people came into India from, we are assuming it is Central Asia. They are the Aryans. There was the Aryan invasion and they entered India. And these Aryans came and conquered the local people. The locals were dark-skinned, whereas the Aryans were fair-skinned. Now just imagine in the previous story what would have happened if instead of the white people from Europe, if instead the blacks from Africa first went to America and conquered the lands. How would the story have been different? Now racism was possible because the whites went first, occupied the lands and got the black slaves, black workers. But imagine another possibility. What if the blacks were the first to go to US and then they needed labor and they went to Europe and captured some white men and brought them to US? Today we would have a racism of different kind. The blacks would be elite. So that's how hierarchies are all usually out of accidental events. In the caste system is an outcome of an accidental event. That is, some Aryans, some white-skinned people came from Central Asia. They defeated the dark-skinned local people and they took control of this land, that is the Gangetic Plains. And now since they were in power, they created a system where they had to be in upper layer. Since they are victors, they won the war and they were more powerful, they wanted to create a society where they will be at the top, the locals who were defeated will be at the bottom. But in the older system, there were talent, all of this was not so much relevant. So what did they do? They just said, they used skin color and they devised this idea of purity and pollution. That they devised an idea of purity and pollution and said the upper castes, who are all Aryans in general, are pure. The lower castes were called polluting. Their behaviors, the behaviors of the natives were labeled as polluting and they were put down at the lower status. So this whole ideology of purity and pollution was created, wherein the behaviors or the cultures of the elite, the Aryans, were called pure, but the cultures of the lower people were branded as polluting. And now that became, this idea of purity and pollution became the basis for creating different castes, and then they made a section of outcasts, Dalits. They were called the most polluting, and since they were most polluting, all the other castes must respect the hierarchy, but all of them must stay away from the lower castes because they were considered polluting. Why? They did some essential services like clearing dead animals, cleaning toilets, all these things. Just imagine if they refuse to do all this and you have to go and clear dead cattle, if you have to clear your garbage and dump it in the municipality sanitation yard, how miserable would our lives be? But these people who gave rise to this caste system did not have any sense of justice. They just wanted to create a system where they were at the top, and to ensure that their privileged position remains, they gave rise to many notions which somehow supported this social system but were hugely, grossly unjust. Not just that, they used Hinduism to strengthen caste system. How? For example, the religion, like we said, Rig Veda, there is this sloka, the Purusha Sukta. It talks about the creator, and from his various body organs came the various castes. Brahmins were the most pure, they came from his mouth. Kshatriyas next, so they came from his thigh. Vaishyas next from his shoulders. The Vaishyas next in level, so they came from his thighs. The Shudras from his feet. So this is how they justified the myth. This myth was created to justify caste system. And where are the Dalits? They are nowhere. They are too polluting to be even mentioned in the same line as the creator. So all of this sounds ridiculous, right? Extremely wrong. But that is how historically oppressive systems were created, and then they were rationalized and their continuity was ensured through religion, political system, and you had various kings who were called heroes, who were worshipped in our epics as those who upheld the Varnashrama Dharma. So the kings who ensured this system were called heroes. If any king fought against it, he would have been branded as a villain. So according to the ancient scholars, Gandhi and Ambedkar would be villains because they tried to challenge this order. So that is how, and if some people, if the lower caste rebelled despite all this, then that would give rise to caste violence. We have episodes where upper castes had inflicted enormous violence on the lower castes to make sure they did not question their position, they did not raise their mouth. We hear about violence. Recently Saharanpur in UP, enormous caste violence, Bhime Koregaon caste riots. Here in AP, for example, there is a village called Karamchedu, enormous violence on Dalits by the landlords, the Kamma landlords caused enormous violence on the local Mala and Madiga Dalits. That went to, the case went to Supreme Court, all the way to Supreme Court. So caste violence was the extreme measure in which they made sure those who remained at the bottom never dare to raise a question. So this is how hierarchies have come into origin. So what are we saying? That hierarchies exist, and hierarchies are largely based on imagined ideas, and then there is no biological basis. So does any of this hierarchy have any biological roots? That's a very important question to ask. In other animals, like even chimpanzees, if there is any hierarchy, chimpanzees have hierarchy, there is an alpha male, but that hierarchy is rooted in biology. The chimpanzee that is alpha male has some stronger characteristics, that like a stronger abilities to attract female or more physical strength. All of this are the basis on which chimpanzee is considered superior. But in humans, is human hierarchy rooted in biology? Not really. The king who is at the top could be a very short man. Napoleon was very short, he was not extremely strong. So human hierarchy is not rooted in biology. The hierarchy the society uses to classify themselves is not based on biology, but is rather cultural. All that we said just now, one word to explain all that we said so far is cultural. That is, we use religion, we use political system, we use mythology, all to explain hierarchy. So the hierarchy in human societies is largely not an outcome of biology, but a product of culture. That's a very important observation. Next, but there is one anomaly to this statement. In general, yes, almost all hierarchies are cultural, but there is one other hierarchy, one universal hierarchy, that is biological. I am sure you must be guessing by now that why is he not discussing the most obvious hierarchy, that is gender or man, woman, male, female hierarchy. Nearly all societies independently have this hierarchy of gender, and the outcome is that women are discriminated. Women, there is feticide, there is infanticide. Women is considered in many ancient societies, for example, a woman was not an independent person in her own right, she was somebody's property. In ancient Athens, even in ancient Persia, if a woman was raped or killed, you know what was the punishment? It was not murder. The person who did it had to pay compensation to the male owner of the person. If she was unmarried, her father had to be compensated. If she was married, her husband had to be compensated. Of course, if she had an orphan, then raping an orphan was not a crime at all, because there was no claim to the property. Very ugly, right? But that was how historically gender-based segregation was done, gender-based hierarchy. Women were at the receiving end. So in many societies, marital rape was an oxymoron. It could not exist, because according to them, marriage means the woman is a man's property. How can a man rape his own wife? That was unfathomable to them. So that is the kind of thinking we had for a long time. And is this discrimination against women biological, or is it purely cultural like racism and caste system? The answer is it is both. It is rooted in biology, but enormous cultural ideas, enormous cultural concepts have been framed to perpetuate it. What is the biological basis that we are mentioning here? The very fact that woman must have child. That child rearing, childbirth is a thing that only women can do. And based around this biological fact, universal biological fact, various cultural ideas have been created to make sure that women are educated, women are discriminated against. To understand this, first we need to get some clarity. We use some words unknowingly that can lead to many erroneous conclusions. For example, we commonly confuse sex and gender, don't we? In this slide, we will discuss how both are very different. For example, sex is a biological concept. Sex is a biological aspect, whereas gender is a cultural aspect. Please, according to sex, a man is an X and Y chromosome. A male is XY chromosome, a female is an XX chromosome. So, male, female, XY, XX, this is all sex. This is very simple. But gender is cultural. Gender is, what is gender? Man, woman. This is cultural. Male, female, that is sex. So, male, female is biological composition, whereas man and woman are social aspects, because we define a man means aggressive. He must go out and do work. He must be engaged in politics. He must be part of the economy. He has some religious duties. If a father dies, the son must go and do the funeral rites. All this is man. A woman means she must be at home, take care of the children. She must be supportive of the husband. She must do the household work. If the husband dies, the woman must embrace widowhood, and her life and freedom is constrained. All this is woman. But male and female is just about biology. 2x is female and x and y is male. It's as simple as that. Whereas gender is not so. So, society defines what is man and what is woman. And in general, most men are males and most women are females. But sometimes there could be mismatch. Today we have examples of some males who are calling themselves women. There was a famous case of Chelsea Manning. He was a male who chose to become a woman. He changed his gender despite being a male, because he associated closely with womanhood than with manhood. So, this is the difference between sex and gender. Two value systems are created. So, we can say sex is child's play, because it is not in your control. You are born a particular way and you are given a sex, but gender is inculcated through socialization and upbringing. You are socialized in a particular way. As children, girls are asked to behave in a particular way, a boy is asked to behave in a particular way. That is how a man and the ideas of man and woman are perpetuated. And not just perpetuated, once this idea thinking becomes part of your psyche, these two, the man and woman, have to live for the rest of their lives. They have to live for the rest of their lives living up to that image. A man must constantly struggle to live up to the standard of a man. He must achieve, he must be aggressive, fierce. A woman at the same time has to constantly prove to herself and to others around her that she is feminine, that she has all the feminine qualities. She is beautiful, she is caring, she is affectionate, she is pretty, all of this. She is a very good mother, a very good wife. She has to constantly keep proving this to herself and to society. In that sense, these roles are assigned. Now, though there is some biological basis, but this distinction of man and woman is largely cultural. Just look at this chart here. Please pause the video and observe this. a very elegant way of describing this. This here to the left is how female as a biological category, that is sex, female is sex, isn't it, as a biological category in ancient Athens and modern Athens. There is no difference. In ancient Athens, female had 2 X chromosomes, there was a womb, she has ovaries and she has estrogen and can produce milk. Even in modern Athens, the female can do all of that. Now observe on the right, this is a woman, a cultural category. In ancient Athens, she could not vote, she was somebody else's property, she could not take political office, she could not get education. But in modern Athens, she can vote, she can take political office and she can get education. That is how it has changed. Even ideas of once, and it's not like this gender roles like a man and woman keep staying constant. In the past, a man looked like this, but today an alpha male looks like Barack Obama wearing a suit and he is very lean. The beauty of the past were slightly chubby women, but today we like size 0. That is the notion of beauty today. So ideas of masculinity and feminism, feminine value is not constant. But as we said, across society, patriarchy is universal. Almost all societies have. And this notion of patriarchy has stood the test of times. Despite political upheavals, India was ruled, had huge invaders. They were Mauryas, Kushans, Guptas, the Harsha's empire, then you had Islamic invasion, Delhi Sultanate, Mughals, East India Company, you name it, so many invasions. Despite all this, something has remained constant. What is that? Patriarchy. Now, how do we explain this patriarchy? Why is patriarchy so universal and so resilient? What makes men? It is woman who is rearing children. She has monopoly, right? A woman probably can do what a man is doing. She can learn, she can go out and make her living. But a man can't do what a woman only can do, that is give birth. So logically speaking, a woman has power, she has monopoly over childbirth. But to the contrary, men are the ones who wield power in all societies. Why is that? We don't know for sure what's the single most logical reason, but there are some theories. We'll briefly discuss 3 theories that point out, try to explain this, but we'll also see that they're not sufficient. The first theory says it is muscle power. Men have muscle power, they're stronger than women. So muscle power is the basis. Muscle power is the basis for men's dominance over women. But this once again doesn't make a lot of sense. Why? If muscle power is the basis, then chimpanzees must be ruling the world, not humans. So muscle power surely cannot be the source of dominance. Next, the other aspect that some theorists point out is aggression, that men are aggressive. They are ready to fight, warmongering, trigger happy, always willing to take up fights. That gave them dominance. But if you observe this idea clearly, aggression, power is got through huge wars. But these wars are not like fighting in a pub or fighting on the road. They are not street fights. They require strategizing, they require planning. All these are not coming out of aggression, because throughout history the great rulers were not those who were aggressive, they are great strategists. For example, Alexander and Julius Caesar both were aggressive, but compared to them there was another king called Constantine. He was more successful because he was Augustus, sorry, it's Augustus, not Constantine. Augustus established a large Roman Empire. That was because he was a strategist. He was not just blindly an aggressive ruler. He was a man of his thinking. So if that is so, and he was able to form alliances and form large scale cooperation systems. But if that is so, women are more good at cooperation. So women must be ruling, right? But how can men rule? So the idea that aggression is the basis of men's dominance also falls flat. Then there is a third theory, that both women and men have different survival strategies. Men survive usually through ambition, aggressiveness and competition, that these are their traits. So they pass these genes to the next generation. Whereas women are more used to being submissive, soft, compromising. So they passed these generations. So over time, patriarchal genes kept being passed on the generation, and that led to men getting power over women. But even this theory is not sure. So even Harari leaves with the question, he just raises the question that men are more powerful and there are these three ideas, but he himself says we don't exactly know what is the reason behind men's dominance over women. But surely it is just that this is largely a cultural phenomena which has root in biological, but other than that, what is exactly that is leading to men's universal domination on women, we are not sure. So that's how we end this chapter, that there is no justice in history. So history has seen enormous amount of injustice, and the modern world is trying to create a better society and a better future by making justice the goal of any modern civilization. No other society said justice is their goal. They said power, they said money. Since there is so much injustice in our history, we saw racism, we saw caste, we saw gender inequality, women being dominated. All of this makes us believe today that justice must be the prevailing value to organize any civilized society. That must be the goal of all civilized societies. Thank you. Come back with the next